Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Here are the stories we're following today.
John, we begin with the latest on the Israel-Hamas war. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country will fight even without U.S. help. He says it must continue its offensive against Hamas in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Netanyahu discussed a potential invasion in an interview on Dr. Phil Primetime on Merit Street Media.
In the Holocaust, we stood alone, but we were defenseless. And today, if Israel has to stand alone, we'll stand alone.
Benjamin Netanyahu's comments follow President Biden's warning that he will pause additional shipments of offensive weapons to Israel if it launches an invasion. Netanyahu says Israel will do its utmost to make sure civilians leave Rafah, where more than 1 million people are sheltering before any attack.
And also this morning, Nathan, we're learning that protesters at Harvard are vowing to continue an encampment at Harvard Yard after talks with the school administration failed. The protesters demanding Harvard University disclose and divest from companies linked to Israel, or they'll stay in their tents and continue an encampment in Harvard Yard. That's according to an Instagram post from the group Harvard Out of Occupied Palestine. They posted that the interim president, Alan Garber, rejected a proposal in exchange for taking down their encampment. Garber this week warned protesters they needed to end their encampment or face consequences, including suspension.
Well, as Israel continues to consider a Rafah invasion, John, White House National Security spokesman John Kirby says the Biden administration shares Israel's goal of eradicating Hamas, but he says, quote, smashing into Rafah would not advance Israel's aim. Kirby reiterated the U.S. is pausing but has not yet canceled a shipment of about 3,500 bombs. Carmiel Arbit with the Atlantic Council tells Bloomberg Israel thinks the administration's pause is having serious diplomatic ramifications.
Israel and its supporters have been very quick to point out that not only is this emboldening Hamas in the context of negotiations, where Israel has tried to use Rafah as a leveraging tool to push Hamas closer to Israel's ceasefire position, but it also sends a message to Hezbollah and to Iran that there is a wedge between the United States and Israel.
Carmiel Arbit of the Atlantic Council adds this is the highest friction point between the two countries since President Biden took office. You can hear more of her thoughts on the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. You can find that on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts.
And meanwhile, in Washington, Bloomberg News has learned President Biden's going to unveil tariffs against China as soon as next Tuesday, marking one of the administration's biggest moves against Chinese trade. And Bloomberg's Stephen Engel is in Hong Kong. He says the tariffs will target 3 key industries.
These new tariffs would be very targeted at the 3 key green industries that Xi Jinping has essentially earmarked as priorities for investment. The new 3, as he called it at the National People's Congress in March, and that is electric vehicles, batteries, and solar.
Bloomberg's Stephen Engel says Biden's plans are a contrast to Donald Trump's pledge to levy a 60% tax on all Chinese imports if he wins November's election.
As for former President Trump, John, his hush money trial continues in Manhattan, and Stormy Daniels has wrapped up her testimony recounting the affair she says she had with the former president. The adult film actress was grilled by one of Trump's lawyers who aimed to portray her as an extortionist and a liar. Brown University professor Wendy Schiller says it's not clear how her testimony could shift the jury, but she thinks the trial will affect the 2024 election.
Trump has been brilliant in getting both fundraising from his donors, but also the RNC to pay a lot of his bills. And that means they can't fund things like organizing, get out the vote, help their county chairs, and help Senate candidates in swing states. And those two kinds of campaigns are going to be crucial to either side's victory in November.
Wendy Schiller of Brown University says Trump continues to critique the charges against him. He's calling the judge in the hush money trial a disgrace after he refused to throw out the case for a second time.
And turning to markets now, stocks did rally on earnings optimism. We also had inflation data, applications for U.S. unemployment benefits coming in higher than expected yesterday. This comes ahead of next week's key CPI reading. Sarah House, senior U.S. economist with Wells Fargo, says a hotter print likely to keep rates higher for longer.
Looking very hard at the core, just given that you have had 3 months in a row of upside surprises, and we really need to see the core begin to downshift if you are going to keep even the potential of even a September cut.
Sarah House with Wells Fargo telling Bloomberg she can't completely rule out a potential rate hike this year, but believes Jay Powell set the bar very high for any hikes in his latest presser.
Well, in Europe, John, the UK has officially exited recession after its strongest quarter of growth in nearly 3 years. GDP expanded by 0.6% in the first quarter, beating all estimates. Elizabeth Martins, senior economist at HSBC, says it's worth keeping the figure in perspective.
My slight worry about it is that some of this recovery was based on expectations towards the end of last year that interest rates were going to come down quite sharply, and the market has repriced away from that, and the risks, I guess, have kind of grown. So it becomes a bit circular. The stronger the economy, the stronger employment and wages and inflation, and the less able the Bank of England is to deliver some of those cuts.
And HSBC's Elizabeth Martin adds next year's GDP forecast for the UK is still set to be the worst in the G7.
And in tech, Apple's set to deliver some of its upcoming artificial intelligence features this year via data centers equipped with its own AI capabilities. This is part of a sweeping effort to infuse its devices with AI capabilities. It also marks Apple's much-anticipated push into generative artificial intelligence, the technology behind ChatGPT and other popular tools. The company's playing catch-up with big tech rivals in the area, but is poised to lay out an ambitious AI strategy at its Worldwide Developers Conference that is set for June 10th.
As for staffing strategies in corporate America, John, Pershing Square founder Bill Ackman was reportedly criticized for his attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion during a closed-door panel discussion at the Milken Conference in Los Angeles. Ackman had previously labeled DEI as inherently racist and illegal. About 40 people, including some of Wall Street's most senior executives of color, confronted him about these views. In a statement afterward, Ackman said he's written thousands of words about his, quote, nuanced views on this important topic. He asked people to read them to fully understand his perspective.
Yeah, that brings us to 5:08 on Wall Street. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. After that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, John. The man who attacked 3 New York City police officers with a machete on New Year's Eve in 2022 was sentenced yesterday. Prosecutors say Trevor Bickford was sentenced to 27 years in prison for ambushing the NYPD officers in the name of jihad in Times Square. The officers who were attacked in the head were seriously injured. Bickford pleaded guilty to attempted murder and assault on January 11th for the attack. Authorities say he traveled from his home in Maine to New York City to, in his words, wage jihad and kill as many targets as possible. Severe weather hit for a 4th straight overnight in much of the South. Storms ravaged parts of Middle Tennessee. A woman was killed and over 100 homes damaged in Maury County. South of Nashville, Governor Bill Lee toured the aftermath of an EF3 tornado that tore through Columbia. He says homes were devastated.
It's heartbreaking. You realize that you don't know what it feels like to be that family, but you know that it must be awful.
Since Monday, there have been nearly 100 reported or confirmed tornadoes across 18 states. The NYPD says one woman is dead and another is in critical condition after they were struck by a vehicle in Bushwick, Brooklyn. It happened after 5 p.m. at the intersection of Eldert Street and Knickerbocker Avenue. The 2 victims were said to be a 71-year-old mother who died and her 44-year-old daughter. Police say the vehicle, a blue Mazda, sped through the intersection with police behind it when the driver crashed into a van and the victims. The driver of the vehicle with Massachusetts plates took off on foot and is still on the loose. The Biden administration wants hospitals to meet minimum cybersecurity standards after a single hack exposed the data of 100 million Americans. Ann Neuberger, Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology.
We launched a platform where countries can share indicators of compromise, can actually collaborate to say, here's what we're seeing in a hospital. Has anybody else seen this? And the goal in all of this is to make it riskier, costlier, and harder for attackers.
Neuberger spoke at the Bloomberg Tech Summit in San Francisco yesterday. The announcement follows Ascension as the latest healthcare system to have a cybersecurity problem. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. That brings us to 5:10 on Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. And for that, good morning, John Stashower.
Good morning, John Tucker. To win the Stanley Cup, you need to win 16 playoff games. The Rangers are almost halfway there, and they've yet to lose. Now 7-0 with the last two wins, both coming in overtime. Game 3 at Carolina, the Hurricanes led. Then the Rangers led. Kane scored late in regulation to tie. It was decided early in OT.
Left side, Lafreniere sends it in. Round the boards it goes. Missed by Orlov. Played it. Score! Score! Yes! Yes! The Rangers win it in overtime and lead the series 3-0.
WEPN, they won 3-2. Oh, by the way, it was Artemi Panarin scoring the game-winning goal. A brilliant tip-in through his legs at a minute 43 into sudden death. Earlier Ranger goals by Chris Kreider, shorthanded Alexis Lafreniere. Rangers go for the sweep tomorrow night. Good night for the teams from Dallas. The Stars, who blew a 3-goal lead in Game 1, nearly blew a 4-goal lead in Game 2. They held on, beat Colorado 5-3. The Mavs won at Oklahoma City, 119-110. That series also tied at 1, and so is the Cavs-Celtics series. Cleveland lost the opener by 25, won last night in Boston by 24. Since acquiring OG Anunoby in a trade with Toronto, the Knicks record with him in the lineup is 26-5. He won't play tonight. Game 3 at Indiana, out with a strained hamstring. Not known if or when he'll return. Knicks look to go up 3-0 in the series. The Phoenix Suns fired coach Frank Vogel after one season. Widely reported the favorite to replace him is Mike Budenholzer. He won a championship with Milwaukee. At the stadium, Astros hit 2 first-inning homers off Marcus Stroman, beat the Yankees 4-3. Anthony Volpe and Aaron Judge homered in defeat. Quail Hollow Golf in Charlotte's Andrew Shoffley shot 7 under, leads by 3 at the LPGA. Clifton, New Jersey, Nelly Korda looking to make history by winning 6 tournaments in a row, but she's tied for 18th, 6 shots off the pace. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. John and Ethan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. If we have to stand alone, we will stand alone. That was the initial response from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to President Biden's decision to withhold some bomb shipments ahead of a possible attack on Rafah. But the Israeli Prime Minister may be trying to smooth things over a bit in an interview with TV's Dr. Phil. And for more, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Brunner in Tel Aviv. Ethan, good morning. So in this interview, the Prime Minister said he's had disagreements with President Biden before, and they've overcome them before. How could the U.S. and Israel overcome this current disagreement?
Morning, Nathan. Well, I suppose the answer would be to somehow split the difference. That is to say, if the Americans are especially concerned about civilian casualties if Israel goes into Rafah. So, in theory, if Israel were to really move people out in some systematic fashion and then have a more targeted set of attacks at the Hamas militants underground there, and the number of people killed is low. The number of civilians killed is low. In theory, that might be some form of reconciliation, right? I think that the biggest problem for Israel is that it's got a two-front war, both in Gaza and then in the north. And if it doesn't have U.S. bombs and weapons, it's going to be in a little bit of trouble. So the pressure has some meaning.
Are we seeing any evidence at this point that Israel could be headed that way when it comes to getting civilians out of harm's way, taking a more targeted approach?
They've been saying some version of this on and off for many, many weeks. I think we really don't know. One of the difficulties right now is that we are also at some kind of a hinge point in these negotiations mediated by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt with Hamas for an exchange and a ceasefire. So if that comes about, and I'm not especially optimistic, but if it comes about, then there will be some weeks without fighting, and then you never know where that goes, right? That's a little bit why hardliners in this country don't want there to be too much of a ceasefire, but the government says it's willing if they can get hostages back. So I think there is some reason to think that. And what I'm saying also is that as Israel edges toward Rafah, part of it is to pressure these negotiations, so it's kind of a double game. in reality happening, but also sending a message. It's difficult to really know what the ultimate attack in Rafah is going to be. I want to add one other thing, which is that there are reports that they've been talking about it and waiting so long that the so-called 4 battalions underground in Rafah may now be down to 2 or 3, with Hamas fighters having moved back to the center of the Gaza Strip, to Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balach. I don't know that, but it is an interesting problem if true.
Only about 30 seconds left, Ethan, but we've heard a lot about what hardliners are looking for when it comes to an invasion of Rafah. What are the Israeli people looking for right now?
I would say that the Israeli people, by a slight majority, would rather see a hostage deal, and they do generally think it's important to destroy Hamas, but they're really eager to get back the 100+ people, many of them dead, about half probably dead, half living, half dead, that are still in the hands of Hamas. That is their top priority right now.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.